Is it a good idea to start with, I suppose, how the regulations have changed recently?
Absolutely. Yep. It's Stuart. So regulatory reform was released and made effective by DEFRA in January 2015, covering England. It's called the Small Sewage Discharge General Binding Rules. Bit of a mouthful. The first issue is that the industry referred to it as a general binding rules. The EA referred to it as the SSD. So there's a disconnect already, even though it's only a bit of language difference, but that doesn't help. Um, it's been brought in to combat the vast number of septic tanks that have been and still are discharging to a surface water, whether that be a stream, a ditch, a river. Um, and it's a great regulatory reform. It's been needed for ages. These individual tiny pollutions don't really get much press, but when you combine the potential hundreds of thousands of these naughty discharges, it is a major pollution issue for our waterways. So it's a brilliant regulatory reform. Um, Initially, it came with a 5-year time frame to assess and then address any non-compliant systems, specifically targeting septic tanks discharging to watercourses. But there's been a real issue with getting the message to the people that need to know about it.
Mm.
We touched on part one because there isn't this database specifically referencing England. We've had this issue and still have this issue to our day, nearly 9 years past the release of this regulatory reform, where a huge number of property owners still don't know necessarily what system they have. They certainly don't know the complexities of what the regulatory reform means, how it applies to them and their system, and certainly what they need to do to bring it up to spec, so to speak. So we are in this quite unique situation where companies like mine, where emptying companies that suck out the septic tank, manufacturers, service companies, literally as they stumble upon a non-compliant system, they're making the property owner aware and then explaining what needs to happen after that. I mean, the reforms are excellent. You can go onto the government website and it explains what the rules are. It explains what the rules are specifically to any new installation in England after January 2015. And to be fair, you can't really get it wrong. But the problem we're seeing firsthand is that it's different people are allowing their own interpretation to come into it. And that's where the lack of police, I know we're going to come on to that, lack of police isn't really helping. We somehow need, even though we're almost 9 years on, to have a real sort of phase two burst of energy to get this message out to the estate agents, surveyors, conveyancers, solicitors, every stakeholder that might come into contact with a off-mains drainage system, directly or indirectly, loosely or otherwise, so they are aware. The more stakeholders that are aware of what the regulations are, what they mean, how they need to be applied, the the better it will be for these systems to be upgraded. I I don't know. I don't think anyone has the data on what number of these systems have been upgraded. But
Mm.
if it's anywhere near 10%, I'll be absolutely amazed. And that's not through anyone being naughty or lazy. It's just a lack of general awareness across the people that need to know about this.
Who's responsible then for, I suppose, one, coming up with the rules, and two, then um, creating the awareness and then enforcing? And
Well, I suppose. Well, the ultimate responsibility is on the property owner or the asset owner, as they're referred to. It's their system, it's their waste, they're responsible for it. But flip that round to who's responsible for making them aware. Well, the EA have released this, as DEFRA's environmental arm, but without a database. How are they going to do it, or how could they do it today? It's an impossibility unless you go a little bit quirky, a bit left field, and say, well, it's normally rural and semi-rural. Let's go through parish newsletters. Let's do
mm,
things locally. I don't think there's a budget. I don't think there's a budget for this. I don't think it's a big enough problem for someone to spend the time to think about how they're going to get the outbound messages out there. So it really comes down to installation companies, service companies, manufacturers, emptying companies to just keep pushing the message home whenever they stumble across one of these systems, to make the property owner aware and then point them to the right people, the right regulations that say how they need to put this right. The regulatory reform, you go on the government website, there is a time frame that says a fair and reasonable time frame for upgrading a system that's been discovered as non-compliant is 12 months after discovery.
Yeah.
But there is no one policing that 12 months. There's no record where someone that stumbles upon a non-compliant system can just tap into a database and say, right then, Mrs. Smith at 1 Rose Avenue, whatever it might be, on this specific day, they've got a non-compliant system. So let's track it forward 12 months and make sure it's been dealt with. There is none of that. So it's all brilliant. It's 99% perfect in its execution to cover all different systems and all varieties and all variables. But that last 1% of getting the message out there, that's been the main problem.
Out of interest then, and you might not have the answer for this at all, but with the, I suppose, the increased focus on water companies and the way that they're discharging mains drainage into rivers, and so on, is that created more of an awareness for off mains, or has it created a distraction?
Neither.
No.
I think, and if you combined all the non-compliant systems that are illegally discharging to surface waters, you could probably equal the volume that a sewage provider discharges on a daily basis. But because we're talking about individual discharges, where unless you're a dog walker and you stumble upon something that doesn't look quite right, you're just not going to notice the pollution on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or at all. But it's happening. The very fact that this regulatory reform has been created tells you there's a problem, a known problem. But again, as we referred to in part 1, there's no press around this. No one's shouting and screaming. And it's almost as if something really bad needs to happen before it gets any PR. But I don't think there's ever going to be a dynamic where something that savagely awful happens. We're talking about these are small sewage discharges. So it's 2,000 litres a day to ground if it's charged into a soakaway, or under 5,000 litres a day going to a watercourse. So you're only looking at 3 to 4 properties. So, residential small setups. How bad could they pollute? It's, it could be quite bad in our world, but on the scale of water companies, it doesn't touch the sides. So it all comes back to the importance, the messaging, who's going to do this. It's, like I say, they've done all the hard work creating this brilliant document, but not many people know about it. And it's just absolutely mind-blowing. It really is. It's baffling.
So it sounds like there's an opportunity there for, as you say, some sort of central database system that starts to track this. So at least in the future, as renewals come through, we can keep track of what might be needed.
Absolutely. It's a bigger picture around the whole concept of making it digital.
Yeah.
Just because these properties are typically very old and typically in the country and no one really cares about them, well, we should care about them, and they are polluting. Not all of them, don't get me wrong, but they are polluting. And the only way to combat this is to have a central database so they can be proactively checked. Reminders can be sent to the asset owners. And without that, this whole process of upgrading all these non-compliant systems could take decades. Yeah, and originally it was supposed to just be 5 years from 2015 to 2020. It's come and gone. It hasn't happened. So are they just going to allow it to organically get sorted out over the decades? It seems a bit pointless. It's great that the regulation is in there. It's great that everyone that should know about it does know about it from my side of the fence, installation side. But why should we be looking at decades? This should be sorted out effective immediate.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I suppose bringing it back to surveying then, the surveyors, we discussed, I think, before the podcast, the issues around PI. Is that because surveyors don't necessarily know what these new rules are that have come out and how to identify the problems that you're mentioning?
Yeah.
Or is it something else?
Some surveyors are completely up to date with all the regs. Like they've obviously spent so much time researching it, and it's really impressive that they're supposed to know every aspect of a property, and yet they spent so much time on drainage and off mains drainage specifically. But yes, the problem comes when perhaps a system has been identified incorrectly. Perhaps an assumption's been made, but it's been written down as and taken, accepted as fact, and then it's proven to be incorrect. So all I've seen over the last couple of years specifically is a shift for surveyors to say it doesn't seem to be connected to a main sewage system. They then grade the drainage as a red 3 within their report. So then the onus is then on the purchaser to further investigate that drainage system with a specialist. And to my mind, some people may think, oh, that's a bit Teflon, that's just diverting the problem. I think that's the best possible thing to do. With these systems, not only do you need a specialist to come and look at them, you need it emptied. You need to ascertain what the capacity is. You need to have a look at the structural condition. You need to see if there's any rainwater cross connections. You need to see where it's discharging. You need to see how big that soakaway system is. Is it going to cope? And without a specialist company coming in, getting the system emptied, then getting all the camera equipment in, no one will ever know. And we do this, and sometimes even with all our kit, we struggle to find all the answers. Sometimes you need to do exploratory excavations to carry on the investigations, and then the costs can really go up quickly. So from a surveyor's perspective, when they're supposed to be looking at every possible part of a building, I think they are doing the correct thing if they point out that it's an off-mains drainage system and that a specialist company should come in and take a look at it.
Is the fear of saying, speak to a third party, the fact that maybe they feel that they're doing that a lot throughout the process? As in, like, they might say, we're not electrical specialists, get an electrician in. We're not gas specialists, get a gas specialist in. Is that potentially why people don't do it, or is it just awareness again?
You could be right. I mean, I don't know what a purchaser expects a surveyor to do. They can't possibly be an expert in every single field. It'd be impossible. But I don't know. I mean, if you're looking at electrics or gas or the drainage, they're specialist areas. My expectation is that I'd want the surveyor to give me an overview and then tell me, in their honest professional opinion, what they feel should happen next. And if they feel there should be 3 or 4 different specialists being brought in to look at certain aspects of a property, then that's fair enough. I appreciate the cost goes up, but they are protecting their customer at the end of the day. And if they feel something needs to be looked at more closely by an expert, then the purchaser is paying that surveyor for their expert opinion. If that opinion is bring someone else in, it should be followed, in my opinion.
No, I get that. So I suppose the last thing from my perspective on this is, if you're a surveyor going out on site, you potentially come across what you think suspect is off-mains drainage, are there certifications or accreditations around the systems that you could potentially ask the owner for, the vendor for, to try and help establish things?
It's the owner, you would hope, would know what's in the ground. You would hope they'd have some background around it, how much it costs to empty, and if it's a sewage treatment plant, how often does it get serviced and who by? You would expect that as a minimum. And the regulatory reform actually says that should be provided through the condition of sale. But more times than not, the owner doesn't know what they have. They don't know when it was installed. They don't know where it discharges to. So even if you have a confident vendor saying X, Y, and Z, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt because you don't know it's true. Anything after 1983, there was a specific British standard that got introduced and implemented, where there's a kite mark on these sewage treatment systems. So anything post 83, you should be able to find this on a system. So at least you know that a certified product that was fine at the time has gone in the ground. But the vast majority of pre-83 old brick and concrete systems. So it's just a case of having a look, make sure it's structurally sound, making sure it's sized appropriately, and then doing a tick box exercise after that.